What's going on, everybody, and welcome to a brand new video series that I'm going to call the Unreal Engine Audio Q&A. So for those of you who are part of my Discord, you know that it's a great place to come and ask questions, get feedback or help on an issue that you're having or a project that you're working on. And while I do my best to try and answer those questions inside Discord, I thought, if somebody's having a question that they're asking here, chances are someone else is going to have the same or similar kind of issue. And so I'm going to be pulling from my Discord and essentially creating video answers. That way, if you do have the same problem, then you can reference the video and all is right in the world. So that's what we're going to be doing with this series. But with this series, that does mean that some of these videos are going to be a little more technical. So for those of you who are just getting started in Unreal Engine, they may be a little advanced compared to what you're used to, but it's still a great learning experience nonetheless. So for this very first video, the question comes from Demon House Design. Demon House says, "Hey guys, can you help me with this? I'm trying to set up alternating wave players. So for example, on first button click, I get sound A. On second, I get sound B. There seems to be a load of ways to do this, but wanted to know what the best practice is." And this is an absolutely great question. So in order to answer it, let's dive into Unreal Engine. All right, so inside Unreal Engine, the first thing that we want to do is we want to create a meta sound. And so we're going to add a meta sound source, and I'm just going to call this switch because we're going to be switching between sounds. And we're going to go ahead and open this up, and I'm going to add a wave player. And yes, I am only going to add one. And we can connect our on finished and our audio and our play up just like we normally would. I mean, you're more than welcome to do other signal processing, but this is just the basic concept of it. And as I'm sure you're aware, by default, wave players can only play a single sound. And the way that we get around that is we're going to pull off of our input node here for our wave asset, and we're going to do a get wave asset array, because an array is a list of data. So whether it's wave assets like it is in this instance, or float values, integers, whatever the case may be, it's a list that we can pull from. And so I'm going to go ahead and connect our on play here to the trigger, and I'm going to pull off of our array, and we're going to promote this to a graph input. Now, since we're talking about switching between two different sounds, over here on the left under our details panel, you'll see that we currently have 0 elements in our array. I'm going to go ahead and click this twice, and I'm just using the starter content stuff. So I don't have any custom sounds in here. We'll use collapse 0 and explosion. One of the important things to note is our collapse sound is in index 0, our explosion is in index 1. And that's where this get node is going to come in handy, because we have access to the index. And so we can put a value, either 0 or 1 in here, and every time it plays, it will play whatever file is in that index slot. But we want to be able to control this. So I'm going to drag this off as well, and we're going to promote it to a graph input. And you can keep the name index. You can name it something differently. The important thing is, though, is to remember exactly what you name it. So I'm going to keep it index. And as far as our meta sound setup goes, this is finished. We'll go ahead and save that, and we can close it. And now we're going to move on to our level blueprint. Now, inside our level blueprint, we need to trigger this whole sequence that we're about to create. So it can be a keyboard input, it can be a box trigger, it could be, you know, something else in your level, just as long as it's sending an execute trigger. For this example, I'm just going to do keyboard input, and we're going to use the 1 key. Now, because the whole point of what we're about to do in the level blueprint is send information into that index input that we created, we're going to go ahead and create a variable, and I'm going to call this index, and we want to switch the type to an integer. And we're going to bring this in, and we're going to get it, and we want to compile it now. And I'm not going to hit it just yet because I want to show you. We want to be able to set the default value, and in order to do so, we have to compile this blueprint. So now we have access to the default value, and by default it is set to 0. We're actually going to set this to -1. And it'll kind of make sense as to why we're doing that here in just a second. Now, off of our index, we're going to do a little bit of math, and we're going to add, and we want to add 1 to it. And so since this is starting out as -1, as soon as we add something to it, it'll then be 0, and then 1, and so on and so forth. And we can actually see this in action. So I'll pull off here, and we'll do a set, and I'll drag this up. And essentially what we're doing is we're just creating a basic counter. So we can see that if we do a print and do a print string, and if we compile this and move out into our level, if I hit play, up in the top left hand corner, now every time I hit the 1 key on my keyboard, you'll see that we have a counting system happening. And so now we know that that is working correctly. Now, the problem with where it is right now is it's going to keep counting up and up, but in our index array, we only have an index 0 and an index 1. So we don't want to count beyond 1. So we need to do a logic check to make sure that we're not going past that. So I'm going to pull off here, and we're going to do equal. And I want this to go, if it equals 2, then we want to do something about that. And what we're going to do about that is we're going to reset our index variable back to 0. So in order to do that, we're going to pull off here, and we're going to do a branch. And if it's true, then we want to set that to 0. If it's false, we don't want to do anything to it. Now from here, I'm not going to connect the execute pin from our set directly into our branch. The reason being is, while I do need to trigger this, I don't want any throughput through here based on a true and false value. So I'm going to do a sequence, and I'm going to connect the then 0 to our branch. And it is important that the very first one goes into our branch. If we were to connect the then 1 to this, it's not going to work. And the reason being is we want to do our integer variable logic check first before we do anything else. If we were to connect the then 0 to adding our MetaSound audio component, it would always play what's in index 0, and it'll never switch between the two. So we're going to take our then 0 into our branch, but we're going to take our then 1, and we're going to add an audio component. And with our audio component in here, over in the details panel on the right, we want to go down and make sure that we are selecting our Metasound as the source. Now from our add audio component, we can pull off here because now we need to send this integer data into the Metasound. So we're going to set our integer parameter. And this is where the name comes in. Like I said, inside our Metasound, we called that input index. And so we need to make sure that's exactly what we're putting here. And now we can get another reference to our index. We could technically pull off this one. It just makes it a little cleaner. And that is it. So we'll go ahead and compile this and save it and move this out of the way. And so now when we hit play, I'm going to hit the 1 key. And you can hear that we have that collapse sound. And now if I hit it again, you can hear that we have the explosion. And if I now hit it again, we're right back to that collapse. And then the explosion again. And so one of the cool things about this is it's fairly modular. So let's say instead of 2 elements, we wanted to then come in here and add a third, and we'll just use our first person fire template. And so now we have 3 elements and we're using index 0, 1, and 2. We can come back in here to our level blueprint, and now 2 is a valid number, so we'll want to use 1 higher. So we can go ahead and set that to 3, recompile it, and now if we come back into our level, pressing 1, we get our collapse sound. Pressing 1 again is our explosion, and if I press 1 a third time now, we get our first person fire sound, and then it still loops from there. All right, guys, so that's going to wrap things up for this video. Hopefully you found it helpful. Hopefully at least one of you found it helpful. Like I said, these are going to be tailored specifically to specific questions that I get rather than, overall kind of general tutorials. And so, if you do have questions, feel free to ask in the Discord. If you're not part of the Sound Effects Guide Discord, you will find a link in the description below. If you'd like to subscribe, you can do so right here. And if you'd like to support me on Patreon, well, you can do that using that link. Until next time.